Hello, welcome to my channel. My name is Alex and I am a nomadic online business manager. And today we're going to be talking about one of the most frequently asked questions I get, and that is how to create a project plan. Now, it's not the most sexiest of questions and areas of your business, but having streamlined project management is essential when you start to scale your business, because you will start to notice these holes as soon as you start getting new clients, building up new products, having a ton of collaborations. However you're building your business, without having streamlined operations, you will notice that as you start to scale. And one of my favorite tools to help you counteract that and help you with your project management is ClickUp. ClickUp is my favorite tool. It helps you manage your tasks, track your time, and all sorts of fun things. So I definitely recommend it. I'll leave a link in the description below for you to check it out. And yeah, let's dive into some tips I have for setting up your own project management or project plan inside of ClickUp. So first things first is you're going to want to decide whether you want to use... Hey, we have a little one who's barking. Go back to bed. So first things first is we're going to want to decide if you want to use a task or a list. So the difference between the two are simply different hierarchical structures inside of ClickUp. And to decide which one is the best one for you, really you want to focus on how big of a project do you have. Do you have a massive project like a launch where there's multiple phases and milestones and you need to keep track of a lot of different parts and pieces and it's really robust? Then you probably want to do a list. But if you're doing a smaller project where maybe you're hiring a photographer for just like a quick photo shoot, that's not like super intensive and having to plan a million different things, then maybe you just do a task-based project plan where you have multiple subtasks where you can keep track of it that way and keep everything inside of one task itself. This will just come with experience and figuring out which one you prefer, but typically my rule of thumb is if there's more than 5 subtasks in one task, then you probably should switch it over to a list, because it's probably going to be a bit more complex than just a simple task project plan. And then the second tip for setting up a project plan is identifying the tasks that need to be completed. This is pretty straightforward. All you have to do is, with this outcome in mind, now you need to brain dump a list of things that need to happen. It's okay if you wanted to do this like on a piece of paper or like a random Google Doc or Notion doc to just kind of brain dump everything, and then you can organize it in ClickUp later. This is typically what I do with my clients. I honestly don't let them go into ClickUp. I am the one who organizes it and sorts it. I call myself the organizer of chaos. But what I encourage you to do is brain dump all of your ideas and thoughts that need to happen around this project into one central place. And then from there, you'll kind of feed them into ClickUp by creating tasks, through setting due dates and all of that inside of ClickUp. But first, make sure you have that brain dump to work from. And then when you create those tasks inside of ClickUp, what you're going to want to do next is identify whether you want to add the information to complete the task inside of the task description or inside of the checklist. So how I like to think about the two is tasks, like a subtask or a task by themselves. These are due date specific. These are things that need to happen on a specific date that you need to keep track of that data for when it needs to be done. If you use a checklist, which is another ClickUp feature, these are good if you want to keep track of individual steps that need to happen, but they're not individually due date dependent, because you can't keep track of a due date inside of a ClickUp checklist. So that's just one way to differentiate those. And then once you have all of the tasks inside of your project plan, everything's mapped out as far as what needs to be done, now is when you really start planning about due dates. I know I mentioned due dates earlier, but now is when we really want to have a calendar open and your roadmap or your plan for whatever you're working on in your business to make sure it's realistic. So you want to make sure you keep those things in mind. So have your own calendar pulled up, as well as any kind of team out of office calendars you might have if you have team members involved. If you're a solopreneur, it's a little easier and you have less people to have to navigate, but you always want to make sure when you're mapping out the due dates for when things need to be done, to give yourself that visual so you can remember, okay, I can't assign so-and-so this task this week because they're out of office. And then a couple other things for tips for when it comes to setting due dates. One is I always set the due date a couple of days before it is officially due to remind myself to check in. Now, there's a couple of ways to do this inside of ClickUp. If you're doing this for a team member, I recommend setting the due date for when they need it done, but doing that a couple of days earlier. So like that person, like the team member knows they need to get it done by that early due date. But if they, for whatever reason, happen to not be able to get it done that specific date, there's still that buffer time without sacrificing the long-term like project plan, which can be very helpful because you always want to schedule in buffer time. It's how you can not stress about your projects getting done. And then another tip, like if you're planning a massive project and just looking at a massive list of a ton of different tasks is very overwhelming, one way to break that down is through phases. And in each individual phase, you can have a milestone. So in planning out that project plan, what I would recommend doing is starting off with first identifying the phases of the project and then going backwards and seeing like, okay, what would be the milestone to mark that phase has been complete? So like, for example, a launch. I recommend having a plan phase where you're identifying all of these planning bits and making sure everyone knows what's going on and all of that communication and initial work. Then I recommend having a second phase of prepare. And during this phase is when you're actually executing, like creating the marketing materials, setting up the tech, setting up any kind of automations or trackers or all of that good stuff is when you're really getting ready for the launch. You might be getting web pages, like your sales pages ready, your registration pages ready, all of that good stuff. And then if you have, assuming you're hosting some kind of launch event, like a webinar or a challenge, then you'll have a phase for hosting that. And then you'll have a phase for when you're opening your cart and when you're selling whatever you're selling. And then you'll have a wrap-up phase where you identify all of the things you want to do once the launch is over and can wrap up everything that way. So that's just one example of a million other ways you can break up a project to make them less overwhelming and make them a bit more digestible. I hope these tips will help you just get your project planning organized inside of ClickUp or whatever tool you may decide to use, because now you are ready to go from that role of being that CEO, that project management, big picture vision, and instead switch over to either the outsourcing phase where you just give it off to your VA, let them get it done, or you start executing and cranking out that launch stuff or whatever you're doing for your project to get that done. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next week.